Hello, it's Krista here with you today, and I know my lighting isn't very good in here, but I wanted to do some reading for you. P.S. Taking notes. If my puppies will be quiet and I can read to you. Okay, I'm just going to start this. 20 diversion tactics of highly manipulative narcissist, BPD in bipolar, bipolar 1, sociopaths, psychopaths, and cluster B antisocial disorders. Number 1, I'm going to start with gaslighting. They said that didn't happen. It might run on in places, but I'm in a good mood, so I might make it funny. This is the biggest emotional abusive that's used at large. Gaslighting, they said that didn't happen. You are crazy and you imagined it, is what they say. It works to distort and erode your sense of reality, and it eats away at your ability to trust yourself, and inevitably disables you from feeling justified in calling out abuse and mistreatment. Makes a person question their own reality. To help validate and talk these experiences with safe, others, validating community, support groups, and write on paper, journaling, grounding yourself of your own reality and back to our own inner guidance, trusting gut hunches, intuition. Number 2, conscious reminders. Projection, holding someone else accountable for their own horrible crap. When a person is chronically holding someone else accountable for their own horrible crap. When a person is chronically unwilling to see their own shortcomings and uses everything in their power to being held accountable for them. It is irresponsibility for one's own behavior put onto someone else. It is psychologically abusive, it is painful, and excessively cruel. They shame us for their own crap. I'm going to have this in probably part 1 and part 2, by the way. There's a lot of notes that I wrote. Example, if a person lies, they'll tell you you're the one lying. It is a blame-shifting game. They win and you lose, and you're blamed for everything that's wrong with them. For help, don't project your own sense of compassion or empathy onto a toxic person, and don't own any of the toxic person's projections either. Projecting our own conscious and value system onto others has the potential consequence of being met with further exploitation. Narcissists on the extreme end usually have no interest in self-insight or change. It is important to cut ties and end interactions with toxic people at ASAP so you can get centered in your own reality and validate your own identity. You don't have to live in someone else's cesspool of dysfunction. Number 3, non-essential conversations from hell. If you think you're going to have a thoughtful discussion with someone who is toxic, be prepared for epic mind fuckery rather than conversational mindfulness. Toxic people use word salad, circular conversations. And I don't understand the word that I wrote. Arguments, projection, and gaslighting to disorient you and get you off track should you ever disagree with them or challenge them in any way. They do this in order to discredit, confuse, and frustrate you, distract you from main problem, and make you guilty for being a human with actual thoughts and feelings that might differ from their own. In their eyes, you are the problem if you happen to exist. That's very sad. Spend even 10 minutes arguing with a toxic narc and you'll find yourself wondering how the argument even began at all. You simply disagree with them about their absurd, like, claim the sky is red. You know, when it's blue. Duh. And now your entire childhood, family and friends, career and lifestyle choices have come under attack. That is because your disagreement picked at their false belief that they are omnipotent and omniscient, resulting in an extremely hurtful narc injury. Uh-oh. Walking on eggshells. Remember, toxic people don't argue with you. They essentially argue with themselves, and you become privy to their long, draining monologues. They thrive off the drama supply, and they live for it. If they can no longer get it from you, it might escalate for a short time, then they will drop you and go find another source that is not educated on any of this. Each and every time you attempt to provide a point that counters their ridiculous assertions, you feed them supply. Don't feed them supply. For help, rather, supply yourself with the confirmation that their abusive behavior is the problem, not you. Cut the interaction short as soon as you anticipate it escalating, and use your energy on some decadent self-care instead. Number 4, blanket statements and generalizations. Narcs aren't always intellectual masterminds. Many of them are intellectually lazy. Rather than taking the time to carefully consider a different perspective, they generalize anything and everything you say, making blanket statements that don't acknowledge the nuances in your argument or take into account the multiple perspectives you've paid homage to. Better yet, why not put a label on you that dismisses your perspective altogether? On a larger scale, generalizations and blanket statements invalidate experiences that don't fit in the unsupported assumptions, schemes, and stereotypes of society. They are also used to maintain the status quo. There's those fingers again. This form of discretion exaggerates perspective to the point where a social justice issue can become completely obscured. For example, rape accusations against well-liked figures are often met with the reminders that there are false reports of rape that occur. While those do occur, they are rare, and in this case, the actions of I become labeled the behavior of the majority, while the specific report itself remains unaddressed. These everyday microaggressions also happen in toxic relationships. If you bring up to a narc abuser that their behavior is unacceptable, for example, they will often make blanket generalizations about your hypersensitivity, or make a generalization such as, "You are never satisfied," or "You're always too sensitive," rather than addressing the real issue at hand. It's possible that you are oversensitive at times, but it is also possible that the abuser is also insensitive and cruel the majority of the time. But it is also possible that the abuser is also insensitive and cruel the majority. Oops, sorry, I already read that. I do that, sorry. Hold on to your truth and resist generalizing statements by realizing that they are in fact forms of black and white illogical thinking. Toxic people wielding blanket statements do not represent the full richness of experiencing. They represent the limited one of their singular experience in overinflated sense of self, deliberately misrepresenting your thoughts and feelings to the point of absurdity. In the hands of a malignant narc or sos, your differing opinions, legitimate emotions, and lived experiences get translated into an evidence of your irrationality. Narcs or cluster bees weave tall tales to reframe what you're actually saying as a way to make your opinions look absurd or heinous. Let's say you bring up the fact that you're unhappy with the way a toxic friend is speaking to you. In response, she may put words in your mouth saying, "Oh, so you're now so perfect?" Or, "So, am I a bad person, huh?" When you've done nothing but express your feelings, this enables them to invalidate your right to have thoughts and emotions about their inappropriate behavior, and instills in you a sense of guilt when you attempt to establish boundaries. This is also a popular form of diversion and cognitive distortion that is known as mind reading. Toxic people often presume they know what you're thinking and feeling. They chronically jump to compulsions based on their own triggers rather than stepping back to evaluate the situation mindfully. They act accordingly based on their own delusions and fallacies and make no apologies for the harm they cause as a result. Notorious for putting words into your mouth, they depict you as having an intention or outlandish viewpoint you didn't possess. They accuse you of thinking of them as toxic, even before you've gotten the chance to call them out on their behavior. And this also serves them as a form of preemptive defense. Simply stating, "I never said that," and walking away should this person continue to accuse you of doing or saying something you didn't, that you couldn't help, to set a firm boundary in this type of interaction. So long as the toxic person can blame shift and digress from their own behavior, they have succeeded in convincing you that you should be shamed for giving them any sort of realistic feedback. Number 6, nitpicking and moving the goalpost. The never good enough. The difference between constructive criticism and constructive criticism is the presence of a personal attack and impossible standards. These so-called critics often don't want to help you improve. They just want to nitpick, pull you down, and scapegoat you in any way they can. Abusive narcs and sos employ a logical fallacy known as moving the goalposts in order to ensure that they have every reason to be perpetually satisfied with you. This is when, even after you've provided all the evidence in the world to validate your argument or taken an action to meet their request, they set up another expectation of you or demand more proof. Do you have a successful career? The narcissist will then start to pick on why you aren't a multimillionaire yet. Did you already fulfill their need to be excessively catered to? Now it's time to prove that you can also remain independent. The goalpost will perpetually change and may not even be related to each other. They don't have any other point besides making you vie for the narcissist's approval and validation. By raising the expectations higher and higher each time, or switching them completely, highly manipulative and toxic people are able to instill for a pervasive sense of unworthiness and of never feeling quite enough. By pointing out one relevant fact or one thing you did wrong and developing a hyperfocus on it, narcs get to divert from your strengths and pull you into obsessing any flaws or weaknesses instead. They get you thinking about the next expectation of theirs you're going to have to meet, until eventually you've bent over backwards, trying to fulfill their every need, only to realize if you didn't change the horrific way they treated you. Don't get sucked into nitpicking and changing goalposts. My dog is going crazy. She wants petted. Because I'm giving you all my attention, so. If someone this is the help part. If someone chooses to rehash an irrelevant point over and over again to the point where they aren't acknowledging the work you've done to validate your point or satisfy them, their motive is not to better understand. It is to further provoke you into feeling as if you have to constantly have to prove yourself. Validate and approve of yourself. Know that you are enough and you don't have to be made to feel constantly deficient or unworthy in some way. Number 7, changing the subject to evade accountability. This type of tactic is what I like to call the "what about me" syndrome. It is a literal digression from the actual topic that works to redirect attention to a different issue altogether. Narcs don't want to be on the topic of holding them accountable for anything, so they will reroute discussions to benefit them. Complaining about their neglectful parenting, they'll point out a mistake you've committed 7 years ago. This type of diversion has no limits in terms of time or subject content and often begins with a sentence like, "What about the time when?" On a micro level, these diversions work to derail discussions that challenge the status quo. A discussion about gay rights, for example, may be derailed quickly by someone who brings in another social justice issue just to distract people from the main arguments. Old Women and Young Women, an author wrote, specifically is needed in order to resolve and address issues appropriate. Specificity is needed in order to resolve and address issues appropriately. That doesn't mean that the issues brought up don't matter. It just means that the specific time and place may not be the best context to talk about them. The help here is don't be derailed. If someone pulls a switcheroo on you, you can exercise what I call the broken record method and continue stating that the facts without giving into their distractions. Redirect their redirection by saying, "That's not what I'm talking about. Let's stay focused on the real issue." If they're not interested, disengage and spend your energy on something more constructive, like not having a debate with someone who has the mental age of a toddler. Number 8, convert and overt threats. Narc abusers and otherwise toxic people feel very threatened when their excessive sense of entitlement, false sense of superiority, and grandiose sense of self are challenged in any way. They are prone to making unreasonable demands on others while punishing you for not living up to their impossible-to-reach expectations. Rather than tackle their disagreements or compromises maturely, they set out to divert you from your right to have your own identity and perspective by attempting to instill fear in you about the consequences of disagreeing or complying with their demands to them. Any challenge results in an ultimatum, and "do this or I'll do that" becomes their daily mantra. If someone's reaction to you setting boundaries or having a differing opinion from you, your own, is to threaten you into submission, whether it's a thinly veiled threat or an overt admission of what they plan to do, this is a red flag of someone who has a high degree of entitlement and has no plans of compromising. Take threats seriously and show the narc you mean business. Document threats and report them whenever possible and legally feasible. Okay, this was Bedtime Storytime Part 1, and may you catch the next one. Peace.